Windrush Anchor Heritage Education Program is a private sector-led intellectual and cultural institution that advances geo-development for sustainable livelihoods and cultural esteem through the Windrush creative ecosystem across the United Kingdom, Caribbean, North America, and Africa. The program's theme of hope, strength, and belonging is transnational, founded on the belief that Windrush communities embody intellectual capital, professional excellence, institutional memory, and entrepreneurial innovation. Collectively, these strengths represent far more than a historical legacy. They constitute geo-development capital that has shaped institutions, and through a passing the baton one generation ahead approach continue to create opportunities for sustainable livelihoods across generations.
Hello and welcome. I'm really pleased to introduce Chris Cummins. Chris, how are you?
Absolutely great.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Chris, our theme today is Barbados to London buses, a family legacy that really helped keep London running and moving, of course.
Absolutely.
Chris, when you think back to your father, your late uncle, and other relatives who came from Barbados to work on London's buses, what memories or stories immediately come to mind?
Wow, I've got so many stories, Rudy, but one that really comes to mind is when I was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the summer 1976, and a glorious summer in many ways. The weather was great. West Indies absolutely slaughtered England in the cricket. Yes. And it was a time actually when I became proud to be black, and it was actually because of my uncle. And he was a bus conductor, and if I remember rightly, it might have been the number 47 bus, and he operated out of Catford Garage. There was a little pub called the Fellowship where they all used to go after hours, after they finished their shifts. And I had the privilege of going out with him on the bus as he was doing his conducting and carrying out his duties. And so it was
red. It was a red bus, wasn't it?
It was a red bus. It was a Routemaster bus, the ones where the old conductors would hang on the back and go, "Come on, laugh," "Oh, stop, hold it for a second, there's a guy on a walking stick," that kind of thing. And it had the old, the machine, the ticket machine and all that. So it was brilliant. I spent many a day just going up and down his route and really enjoying the whole experience. And he was a real character. And what I really learned from him was people skills and adaptability and being able to be like a chameleon. You might have a really rich person on there as a customer, and he'd speak a certain way, and then if it was a kind of someone like him or a fellow Barbadian, then they would all have a nice banter, and money was exchanging hands, and he was brilliant at maths, calculating quickly, getting the change back, giving them ticket, bing, and off you went. Carried on, ding, ding, it's just brilliant.
Coordination.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So, and he's on his feet all day doing that, up and down, apart from that, almost at the terminuses where, you'd only have one or two passengers. And then as you got further into London, it got fuller and fuller and fuller, So, yeah. So there you go. I remember people smoking on the bus, upstairs, all that kind of stuff. It was all, the smell of diesel and that funny gear stick that the driver would have, that thing, that lever pull thing that he had on the side, Yeah, amazing memories.
Growing up, did you realize the significance of what they had achieved, or has your appreciation of their contribution grown as you become older?
I think the latter. And the reason I say that is it's really funny when you grow up in that environment, when you're small, everybody's black, that you look up to. I mean, so you go around people's houses, everyone's black. There's the smell of nice cooked food, and there's music playing on a radiogram. Maybe some old people just swaying from side to side dancing. There's all that going on. And and people playing dominoes and drinking those little glasses with little shots of rum and all
Paraffin
that kind of
lamps,
stuff.
paraffin lamps.
Paraffin lamps, oh, the smell of paraffin, all that kind of stuff's going on. And, so you realize, we really were in a minority and they were putting up with some hard pressure during the day, just conducting themselves. And I didn't realize how tough it would have been for them until I entered into the world of work and became an adult myself. And I thought, wow, these guys, if it's tough now, I can't imagine what it was like for my parents' generation. And that includes the buses, of course, passengers who didn't want to put their hand on you. They dropped the money in my uncle's hand, people like that. But then you'd have absolutely lovely people on the bus as well that, he became good friends with on those routes. So, you had the yin and the yang.
Working on the buses, as you've described, wasn't simply just a job. It became part of Britain's social history. What do you think today's generation can learn from the resilience, professionalism, and determination of those pioneers?
Well, it's really interesting because, my aunt was telling me stories about when they first came over and no one wanted, you remember, on a bus, it's a crew, you got the driver and you got the conductor. And so it's a bit like having partners as police officers. And so very often the driver didn't want to work with with a black conductor. And so there'd be a lot of black conductors who've been trained just sitting at the garage. And my aunt remembered that at Catford and Peckham and some of those. So, they had to deal with that, you know. That must have been soul destroying as they came over thinking that, everything's paved with gold. They get on the training course, they pass the course, they do all that. And then when it comes to the harsh reality of actually having a shift, you can't even get a shift because no one wants to work with you.
Of course, in those days, it wasn't illegal.
No, that's right. Hence the bus boycott in Bristol, right? That kind of, so it was terrible for them, so I think the younger people, the younger generation can learn from some of that and help them to be more determined when it comes to getting promotions, really getting into their careers and, not, having gratitude, is slightly different to being grateful, if that makes sense. So, and really showing that, moving forward. So that, I guess that's my answer for that.
Yeah. Your work today is centered around mentoring and developing future leaders. How has your family's journey influenced the way you lead and the way you invest in other people?
Well, it's really interesting because my family have always been very close and it's like a really close-knit community. We've had some real highs and we've had some absolutely terrible lows in our family, and we've always really worked closely together. And I think that's really kind of helped us in many ways. And that's, I suppose, looking at that has really modeled how I've and my friend Tony has kind of created baseline mentoring in that kind of image, in that kind of, the village, as it were. And we really want to make sure that we're putting the next generation through with the help of those people who've been there and done it.
Right. Why do programs like From Barbados to London buses matter so much, particularly when some of the people who live these experiences are sadly no longer with us?
Well, the whole point is to create a legacy so that there's that really close bond. And there's no better time in the world's history than now than to have that bond between the people who left Barbados in search of better opportunities, getting those opportunities with the buses, and actually being able to proudly stand up. And many of them obviously sent their money back to Barbados. So, for example, my uncle has a son in Barbados who always lived there and, has always sent money back to the son, as far as I know. So he might tell me different. But, the whole point is there's always been that connection. And the son that comes over every year, watches the cricket, and then goes back, so there's always those links. And I think that's really, really important to continue that and strengthen it rather than allow it just to peter out.
But so if your father and your uncle were sitting beside us today, watching this interview, what would you want to say to them?
Well, I want to say thank you for all the great service you have given and been part of that fantastic ecosystem that was created that really helped the West Indian community and the Barbadian community in particular have psychological safety. You know, if you're a fellow Bajan and you've come over and you've worked on the buses, then you've become part of a community that used to take us to Margate on a bus. Or as a whole, it was so funny, a whole bunch of West Indians
Seaside,
getting off
those seaside
those seaside
excursions.
excursions, right? And all the aunties would have those massive, great Dutch pots full of rice and peas and stewed whatever, curry goat, all that kind of stuff. Was so lovely. And then they'd give you sandwiches, ham sandwiches and cucumber sandwiches and all kind of sandwiches, cheese sandwiches, cheese and pickle sandwiches and all that. So you'd be just stuffed all the way there. The sandwiches would be on the bus and then the cooked food on the beach. And we were a sight to behold, a whole black wave all along the beach in Margate or wherever, Brighton, wherever the places we went on those big red buses. It was brilliant.
Finally, if someone watching this interview has a parent, grandparent, or relative who worked on London buses after coming from the Caribbean, what would you say to encourage them to be part of this overall program?
Well, it's interesting because, firstly, as you pointed out to me, we have our own memories anyway.
Yes.
And then on top of that, I don't think it's that difficult to encourage our elders to tell the story because they're natural storytellers.
Yeah, we have to listen.
We've got to listen. And I had a lovely lunch with my aunt, and I said, "Oh, we'll save it for another time." And then, we just riffed for 2 hours talking about my uncle and the contribution and how brilliant the community was and the extracurricular activities they all did at the buses. It was great. So, I'd encourage anyone to do it. It lifts your own spirit and makes you feel proud. Anyway, just having that conversation. So, definitely I'd encourage it.
And if you could sum up the legacy of your family's journey from Barbados to London in one sentence, what would it be?
I would say a journey of hope that was realized in the end.
That's a great sentence because our whole Windrush Anchor Heritage Education Program, the key themes are hope, strength, and belonging.
Fantastic.
Chris, if people would like to get in touch with you, because you've got an international reputation for mentoring, particularly young people and future leaders, how would they connect with you?
Really simple. You can see just down below it says Baseline Mentoring. So if you go on to just go on Google and Google Baseline Mentoring, then really, really easy. And then on there it says download the app. And then our team will take care of the journey for you to either become a mentor or a mentee. And then we go from there.
The app is really innovative. So would you just like to say a little bit more about how the app works? And
Yeah, I will. I mean, basically, the whole point of the app is what I wanted to do with my partner Tony. We came up with this idea that the app would be almost like a dating app. So you've got this village of mentors who we have actually trained and certified, right? So we've got over 50 mentors who are basically there ready and waiting for mentees. And then basically the mentees, depending on what the mentors have done or their experience, you know, you could have engineers, you've got doctors, we've got lawyers, but we've also got people who've been salespeople or, you know, senior leaders, those sorts of people. And they've got a wealth of experience. And the whole point is you download the app as a mentee, and then you just kind of swipe until you find someone that kind of matches the mentoring skills that you require. And then after that, you make a request, and then the person accepts, and then your mentoring starts. So, you know, it's a very, very low cost process. It's like £10-ish per month. So, and we do that so that we can continue to build more assets which are on the app so that you can learn when you're not having your mentoring sessions. So that's basically how it works.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and talk to you again soon.
Fantastic. Thanks a million, Rudy.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.